Namaste, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for all the attendees across the globe. We have people from several continents joining this call today. And a very warm welcome to today's session with Nilesh. And many of us already know a lot about Nilesh through his books and online content. And last time I knew was like thousands, and like after that we stopped counting how much content he has online, and maybe he can give exact figure if it is already increased by a few hundred in last couple of weeks. So anyway, it's my privilege and I feel honored to introduce Nilesh with who is with us. And we already know about Nilesh. Nilesh wear multiple hat because he's an author of several books and valuable books, researcher, speaker, corporate trainer, and coach, consultant, and many more. So there is a long list. And out of his several research work, the one which is very important for today's session is his work around Mahabharata. And he meticulously researched around Mahabharata with scientific precision, and his observation from this oldest epic of humanity, Mahabharata, he came up with the exact date of Mahabharata, and that's what he's going to present today. And I want to thank Nilesh on behalf of Seva International and IAR community, and as a whole, everyone, for organizing this. And I will take like maybe a minute or two of telling about this organization. So in Indian Association of Rocky, who's organizing this, and Indian Organization of Rockies is like non-profit, serving community since 2012, promote Indian culture and values, have more than 1,500 associations in around Denver, organized multiple cultural events, organized several donation camps, food drives for local Indian tribes, native tribes, firefighter, old age homes, and even a lot of work during the COVID times, arranged debris cleanup in the mountains during some natural calamities and all. And they have affiliation and partnership with several groups, and IOR has many affiliations and work hand in hand with Seva International, and associated with Colorado Cricket Club, tennis club, badminton, and so on. So the list goes on. So they are very much there. And now I'll go to like Seva International. So Seva International is non-profit charitable organization since 2003. Seva movement is in 20 countries, established in 1989 in India, UK in 1991. There are 145,000 individual projects under Seva movement. And here are some pictures of their great works around the globe. And their mission, what is Seva's missions? Seva serves humanity in distress, aid local communities, run development work projects for the undeserved, and assist people in transformational change through the power of innovation, mobilizing partners, donors, and volunteers, their wide network. Seva accomplishes this mission by focusing on effort work toward disaster recovery. They did wonderful work during recent disaster recovery, several places in US in last several years, which I am aware of. Family and child welfare, promoting volunteerism. Seva International does not discriminate based on color, gender, race, religion, and national origin. Seva overall effort for COVID-19 in USA, they made like more than 3,000 plus volunteers, 100,000 plus donated to food pantries in US. 43 chapter actively working and supporting COVID-19 relief work, distributed 625,000 several type of masks to hospitals, firefighter, county jails, cities, and senior centers. 63,000 hot meals served so far and counting, and distributed food and groceries to 45,000 plus families, 300 plus gallons of sanitizer, more 180,000 homes made masks distributed. Seva team has 200 plus physicians and attorneys, and that they have a group, and if anybody in distress need help, these volunteers provide those help. Total 90 webinars conducted about health, immigration, career, financial, travels. I know a lot of those help were so valuable. Helped more than 250 international stranded students for their needs like food, accommodation, and moral support. Seva team is working more than 900 plus with more than 900 plus organization for COVID relief work. So that was on Seva, and from here I will ask Anusha ji to take and tell us more about the program. Anusha ji, you're on mute.
Namaste everyone. Thank you, Amanji. That was truly inspiring. Let's start this session with a small sloka. It's going to be for like just a couple of seconds, so just be comfortable wherever you are, and it would be really pleasing if you can join me. Om Asyato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amrutangamaya Om Shanti. Thank you, everyone. So, like just before we get into this session, let me ask you a quick question. So, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when I say this word, Mahabharata? Yes. To some of us, it's about the war. To me, it's about the great discussions between Lord Krishna and Arjuna. To some of us, it's about the great Karna. But like, what exactly is Mahabharata? It's a great history that we withhold within us. It's a great story. It's a story of war. It's a story of kings and queens. It's a story of good and bad. It's a story of heroes and villains. It's a story of the choices we should be making in life and the choices we should not be. So, like, why is this session very important to us today? So, if we just have a kid, like, India got its independence. So then they'll start asking, when did it happen? How did it happen? And like, what made it happen? And everything. So this knowing of like decisive dating, it's so huge, and this happening at this time, I definitely believe it's just gonna change the way we think, the way we gonna look at things. So I'm so glad that Nilesh ji is here today to do this session. And I'm so glad to let you know that we also have Sri Padma Bhushan, Sri Manyanand ji with us today here. And this session is going to be about like 45 minutes. And Nilesh ji is going to be here to answer all your questions for about 20 to 25 minutes after the session. And I would also like to mention this. There were supposed to be so many teens joining this call today for this session, but they couldn't do it for the exam they had. So all the kids out there, please keep your questions coming throughout the session, but Nilesh is going to answer them at end of the session. So not only kids, everyone, like whatever strikes your mind, just keep them coming towards us and we'll try to answer as many as possible. So without any further delay, Nilesh ji, please take over and enlighten us today. Thank you.
Right. Namaste, Anusha ji. And thank you everyone for joining on this Saturday morning, afternoon, or any other time, since we have people from different continents. Also, my naman to Padma Bhushan Ved Nanda ji. I had a great pleasure of spending time with him a couple of years ago at the Waves conference in Dallas, Texas. So before getting into my presentation, Anusha ji gave a great introduction in terms of why care about the Mahabharata. And I am not going to spend much time on why we should care, because the very fact you are here, you have some inkling why it matters to you. There are many aspects of our human personality. I mean, there is this dharma, artha, kama, moksha. There is a psychological personality. There is a physical personality. There is a social personality. And I receive, in fact, my research work is purely technical as it comes to the Indian Itihasa. Having said that, I cannot tell you how many emails or messages through social media I receive, that somewhere even my work, although it's very technical in nature, it touches individuals, and many people will say it really saved them from the crisis that they were going through. And sometimes, I mean, I don't make a fun of it. Actually, it's such a rewarding feeling. But sometimes I ask them, okay, so what was it exactly that led you to this wonderful feeling? And I get all kinds of answers. So with that introduction, I'm going to start sharing the PowerPoint. And let me time myself here too. So you need not worry in terms of the timing of it, because I am going to put a timer to myself, okay? So I won't go over time. Okay, so why is it crucial to know? We have these questions about, in a way, anything, which is to say, why? And one simple answer from comprehending, understanding the Indian civilization, Indian civilizational history, is that everything turns around the Mahabharata. You can call it a linchpin. You know, in the automotive, that is that one thing that keeps everything together, the whole propelling mechanism. Mahabharata is like that, because you will find all our ancient Indian narratives, especially all the Puranas and all the post-Mahabharata literature, every time they are trying to connect it to Mahabharata. Even as simple as, and it's not very simple by the way, but Panini's Ashtadhyayi, like the grammar book, to explain certain usage of a language, he will even quote from Mahabharata, okay, and things of that nature. So as a sheet anchor for our civilization, it's very important. I gave you a simple example from the physiological, psychological point of view. People find solace in it. The Bhagavad Gita, that very much is respected around the world, in spite of, irrespective of the color, the religion background, the what do you call, the geographical background. Everyone has taken inspiration from this Bhagavad Gita, which is part of this Mahabharata. In summary, it provides us the context of a space and a time. And that's what we have, right? We as a human being, individual or as a group, we are dropped in this framework of a space and time. So it gives us some roots, grounding on anything that you want to explore. In fact, Mahabharata goes on to claim, and it's a very tall claim. If you just look at the statement, it says, what is there that is out there, but not in the Mahabharata? Which is to say, it is trying to say that almost anything that you can think of is there in the Mahabharata. And very rarely there is something that is not in the Mahabharata that you will find outside. It is a tall claim. But if you really want to see if it is a tall claim or if it is a justified claim, then my hope is that my presentation here encourages you to go into go to the Mahabharata, the original Mahabharata, with some kind of translation and explore it over a period of time. Now, how are we going to do it? Specifically the timing of Mahabharata, which is the subject today. Well, if it's about Mahabharata, we have to start with the Mahabharata. I mean, that's a common sense, that's logic. Then we have to find some things in the Mahabharata that we can test in an empirical fashion, in a scientific fashion, in an objectively testable fashion. What I mean by that is, if I claim something from Mahabharata and I have tested it in a certain fashion, if you follow that process, you should be able to reach the same conclusion. Now, it assumes that you also have the required background knowledge to do that. That is understood. So text, different references about Mahabharata are important. Then we need a framework, logical comparison, how to do the analysis, how to do objective testing. And what we are going to end up with, I mean, I am convinced, a number of you who might have already read my work are convinced. Thousands of people in academia, outside academia, researchers, individual professionals, they are convinced of it. But we don't have to take anything on a blind faith, okay? So obviously my claim is that it is the best claim among all available claims. And I'll briefly talk about it, how many different claims are out there, and which is a good thing, which means there is a
Nilesh, you went
Sorry.
on mute.
Yeah, I saw that. Suddenly I think it went into unmute. I hope I was on mute only for a few seconds. Was it not?
Yeah, maybe
Okay.
10, 15 seconds. Yeah.
10, 15 seconds. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's see. And scientifically speaking, we look at any claim as something that most likely versus less likely. That is what science can do. That is what even Indian Darshan Shastra can claim. Okay, the best thing we can do is the best approximation to the truth. Okay, now quick question to all of us. I mean, do you have what it takes to understand and to research? So these are required for both. And I'm using the framework, which is very much the framework of the Mahabharata and therefore Bhagavad Gita. It is the framework of Shraddha, Samshay, and Jidnyasa. And you need all of them, and you need them in the right way. Okay, what is that way? Just as a metaphor, imagine drawing, and most of the students who are there busy with the exams, but they may be watching. Imagine your Cartesian coordinate system. Okay, so let's think of this as the x-axis of a Samshay. Samshay means doubt, a creative doubt. Now you can have a Samshay of a mind, or you can have a Samshay of an intellect. The Samshay of a mind goes something like this. Well, I don't think this is possible. How can this be possible? That is a Samshay of a mind. The Samshay of a Buddhi says, this is interesting. I wonder, how is this possible? How is this ever possible? That Samshay of a mind, Samshay of a Buddhi doesn't stop by asking that lazy question or raising that question and just leaving it there, but that individual does something about it. And that can lead to this satisfaction, okay, the Jnana Trupti. Think of another axis of a Shraddha. Shraddha means faith, Shraddha means reverence, Shraddha means conviction as a Nishtha. And that can also go from extremely tamasic, meaning of a very lower kind, to sattvic, okay, of a very beautiful kind. Now the Shraddha or the conviction is required to do any activity, okay, otherwise there is no motivation to do it. And therefore the Shraddha leads to Karma Shakti. I did not say what kind of Shraddha. Okay, it can be of a wrong kind, it can be of a right kind. Both will lead to Karma Shakti, both will lead to activity, good or bad. I did not get into it. And precisely for that reason, you need other aspects beyond Shraddha. The third aspect is a Jidnyasa, the curiosity. Again, the curiosity has two extremes. One is Kutuhal, which means what I would say, I would translate this as a idle curiosity. Like some people will meet me in a social setup, even at the, let's say, Whole Foods, or grocery. And they'll say, I think I have seen your face, looks familiar. And then I'll say, you must have seen me on the YouTube or something. And immediately they will say, yeah, so just explain me, like, how did you do it? Now, this is not something, you can explain in 5 minutes. But my point is, it's not sufficient just to ask the question. You should have a sufficient curiosity to do the needed work to find out. And I'm not referring only to Mahabharata. This is applicable, what I'm showing you is applicable to anything that we want to achieve in life, anything we want to know in life. So two types of Jidnyasa. One is a Kutuhal, which is simple idle curiosity. The other one is a Saprayojana, which is to say we have to have a curiosity in something. If we find the answer to it through Shraddha and through Samshaya and then Tapasya and Seva, like a Seva International, the activity needs to be done to achieve certain purpose, then it should lead to some output. It should lead to a desired output. So prayojana, that's what is needed. So these three things are very, very important. And I'm going to go fast through these. These are some of the keywords that you will find through the pages of Mahabharata. What is desired is the top right-hand corner. Okay. So if you have a karma, if you have a Shraddha of a sattvic kind, if you have a Samshaya of a Buddhi, and if you have a Jidnyasa, which has a Saprayojan, okay, it's a very pregnant possibility that you're working on. It leads to Abhyuday, it leads to prosperity, it leads to growth of knowledge, solutions, and so on. Okay. Now, that is a psychological setup that we need. Quickly, I want to talk about the technical setup that we need, which also has some psychological aspects. For example, what you are saying in this triangle, there are 5 elements, which is nothing but the logic of scientific method. the most sophisticated modern science or science in general that anyone will ever talk about or talks about is there in these 5 words. Sir Karl Popper, who is a great philosopher of science, who was a great philosopher of science, he described the logic of scientific method using these simple 5 words. He said, essentially, it's a triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing in the context of a theory and in the context of a background knowledge. When I use the word explanation, that refers to the evidence. Now, I don't know how many of you know this, but if you go to the Indian Darshan Shastra, you will be surprised to know that what just Sir Karl Popper said, or what I repeated, his statement, that is said in a sutra form. For example, if you go to Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, okay, it says Pratyaksha Anumana Agama Pramanani. In a very brief form, it's explaining this same thing. Or if you go to Nyaya Darshana, Sage Gautama is saying Pratyaksha Anumana Upamana Shabda Pramanani. Again, he is saying the same thing. If you understand the Avayava process of a Nyaya Darshana, the logic, the logical reasoning, it goes through these 5 elements. It says first your Pratijna, okay, you say, what are you talking about? So let me tell you my Pratijna. My Pratijna is to convince you, or at least give you a highlight of, that the Mahabharata war happened in 5561 BCE, that is more than 7,500 years ago. So that's my Pratijna. Okay, then the Hetu, which is to say the reasoning. And I'm saying, well, I looked at all the evidence from the Mahabharata text and tested it in a logical fashion, in a scientific fashion, and just filling the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, crossword puzzle, like solving the Rubik's Cube. And it leads to only one date, 5561 BCE. My point is, you can go through these 5 steps of a Nyaya Darshana, the Avayava, and you will find that it's nothing but the method of modern science. The modern science that supposedly discovered, say, last 500, 600 years with European Renaissance. Okay, it was already known to the Indian scientists for thousands and thousands of years. Okay, we have a documented proof of it. I started with this method quickly. This is with my first book going back 10 plus years. Then I realized when people started consuming this, I quickly realized that that is not sufficient. Because while they were understanding the evidence, they were confusing with the inferences. Then I realized actually you also need a Vijnana Buddhi, in English, scientific acumen. Okay, you also need Tantra Yukti, how to read something, how to identify a problem, how to devise experiments to solve it. Okay, so you need Tantra Yukti, and you also need Tarka Shastra. Even after doing the experiments, you find the outcome. Now, how to draw correct inference from that information, we need Tarka Shastra. Guess what? These are the 3 foundations of our Hindu Dharma, Hindu civilization. Okay, forget the name Ashtakranshakti, that is the name given by me because there are 8 things here. Vijnana Buddhi talks about the freedom of thought. Without freedom of thought, there is no possibility of reaching the truth, because we might get stuck into what somebody said, we might get stuck into what somebody else has an opinion, and so on. Okay, you can always question it the Samshaya fashion and Jidnyasa fashion and see if you get a better answer. I'll quickly move through this. Achar Sahishnutta means endurance in conduct. And I'll give you example of it. So when I started this journey, I started with one specific verse from the text of Mahabharata when I was up in Canada. By the way, because this is a Rockies group, my association with the Rockies is for more than 10 plus years. Okay, actually the picture that Amanji showed there for the Rockies Association, I wonder if it's a Moraine Lake from the Banff National Park. Maybe not, but I was like a regular. I used to almost go every weekend to Banff National Park because I lived in Calgary, and before that Edmonton, and of course I've been through the Rockies. My point is, back to this. So the endurance in conduct, I started with that one verse when I was doing my master's in Alberta. And I thought very naively that I'm going to solve this over a weekend. Okay, maybe the engineering pride or engineering overconfidence, you can say. In reality, it took me 15 years, from 1995 to 2009, to solve the mystery behind one verse, one shlok of Mahabharata. And therefore that endurance in conduct comes in picture. I never gave up. I was trying different Tantra Yukti. Can I try this way? Can I try this way? I tried possibly 20 different things before finally I hit on the answer. And the last one is the Tarka Shastra, two aspects, one to how to think logically, but the next one is, do you really care for the truth, or are you in this to make a quick name for yourself? Is it something that you want to be in the limelight so that people call you a great researcher, people call you a Mahabharata researcher, or whatever subject area you are working in? Or do you really care to know the truth at the risk of you spending a significant time and still not succeeding? Okay, so that's when these absolute morals of ahimsa, satya, steya, kama, krodha, lobhata, those all come into the picture. So I realized that you need this, because you can find many fake individuals in any discipline, and the dating of Mahabharata is not an exception. All right, so I'll go a bit fast through this. Okay, so as Richard Feynman, the very famous professor of physics, okay, great scientist, Nobel laureate, used to say, let's do some physics. So I'm just using that phrase to say, let's do some itihas, all right? So based on what I told you, I'll quickly summarize my 25-30 years of work, and then we will get into Mahabharata. What you see on the axis there, the horizontal line, is the time axis. Okay, metaphorically we can consider Shiva, okay, as a Kala, and Vishnu, Vish dhatu means like spread or expand, okay, that is means space, and Shiva and Vishnu are space and time, and then Brahma comes and creates the universe. Okay, that is a metaphorical way of understanding Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. That is not the only way, but that is one very legitimate way that you will say. So we have this axis of time, and now against this we are going to go backwards. Today is us right now, 21st century. 0 refers to going back 2000 years to the beginning of a Gregorian calendar. Before that, if you go minus 5k means minus 5000 years, or 5000 BCE, 10,000 BCE, 15,000 BCE, and so on. As I said, I began with the dating of the Mahabharata. I extracted 300 plus every single possible astronomy description, astronomy reference I could find from the pages of the Mahabharata. And then, as I said, in empirical fashion, I tested each one of them, sometimes together, sometimes individually, but all of them take us to that 5561 BCE. I did the exactly same thing to Valmiki Ramayana. To my surprise, and hopefully to it surprises you too, although Valmiki Ramayana is much smaller in comparison to Mahabharata. Mahabharata is like 5 times bigger than Valmiki Ramayana. So I was surprised when I found close to 600 specific astronomy references in Valmiki Ramayana. And again, when I put them in a jigsaw puzzle fashion, in a scientific way together, it leads to one specific year and no other, 12,209 BC, for the year of Ram Ravan Yuddha. And from that, you can also use additional evidence from Ramayana to find the timing for other instances of Ramayana. And then relatively recently, like 2016, so maybe 4 years ago, I got into Rigveda dating more through the research work on the river Saraswati. And this is an approximate dating, but I want to just state it. What it shows us, the Rigveda evidence shows us, when combined with the scientific evidence of Saraswati and everything else that is available, that the last portions of Rigveda, like 10th Mandal, for example, belong to the same time as Mahabharata. And why? Many of us actually know that Vyasadeva, who wrote Mahabharata, also recasted, re-edited the Vedas. Okay, so some references from that time are also part of Rigveda. But if you look at the oldest mandal, okay, Rigveda has 10 mandal. You know, think of this as a sub-chapters, subsections, and then there are chapters and so on. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay, good. Okay, all right. So, so this is where I was, and I was mentioning the Rigveda. So definitely we can say with the confidence that Hindu civilization, we have evidence that definitely allows us to say that it is older than 24,000 years. Let's get into the Mahabharata. Remember, I mentioned the 5 elements, the triangle of explanation, prediction, testing, in the context of a theory and in the context of a background knowledge. So what is my theory? My theory is simple, and that's how it should be. All astronomy observations of the Mahabharata text are actual, factual, visual observations of Mahabharata times. Then we have to bring the explanation, the evidence. So as I said, I extracted all astronomy observations from Mahabharata text. They amounted to 300 plus. Then I objectively tested each one of them. And what it means is, whatever I claimed or whatever I am saying, if you pick up my book or watch my video or read my blog, you should, and you have some understanding of astronomy, not a very complex understanding, you should able to reproduce what I am claiming based on the Mahabharata evidence and based on the knowledge of astronomy. So then finally we bring this all together for a specific purpose, in this case, the date of the Mahabharata war. And the background knowledge that is employed is very simple and straightforward. It is the knowledge of astronomy, knowledge of Indian astronomy, knowledge of the astronomy in the Mahabharata, knowledge of modern astronomy, and the text of Mahabharata. We don't need anything else. Okay, so what does it tell us? So I'm just quickly summarizing. So 125,000 shloka of the Mahabharata, 18 parvas. Out of that, this separation or Pruthakkaran is one of the element of scientific acumen from our Darshan Shastra, which is once you decide what your theory is, you extract based on that theory. So back in 2009, I extracted 215 references. Guess what? I had missed many. Now they amount to 300 plus. But I'll tell you something beautiful. So when I drew the conclusion that the Mahabharata war happened in 5561 BCE, it was based on that 215 references. Then I found, or many other people found, and they brought it to my attention, additional astronomy references from Mahabharata, which is what, 100 plus. And guess what? Any of them in principle could have falsified 5561 BC, but it didn't. In fact, all of them also support that particular date. Okay. How do these astronomy observations look like? Because, you know, many people who may not have seen the Mahabharata text, they may be wondering what form it is given. Remember, Mahabharata is a kavya. Okay. It's a Arsha kavya. It tells us so many aspects of our itihasa of a specific time. But it's a kavya, it's a poetry, and therefore everything comes in the form of a kavya. So the references are given as a nimitta, which means simply signs, upamana, like analogies and metaphors, okay, and then you can also see some references coming in the form of a alankar, like poetic embellishments. So it takes certain knowledge to know what is astronomical, and I'll share some if I get time. So after those references are found, the next step before jumping into testing them is to classify them. And I'm going to share a metaphor with you. I separated them in two big buckets. Okay, the one that you see in the blue is of one kind, and astronomy speak, these are the effects due to the precession of the Earth's axis. Okay, these are long-term observations. Okay, they don't change every day. So they tell us where to search. If I have to use a analogy of, say, finding a Niagara Fall, we would say, well, first go to North America, either go to Canada or US, then go to the area of the 5 lakes, and then go to the Lake Erie and look for a Niagara River, and so on, right? So this blue references, when tested, gives us a broad time period. On the other hand, there are many other astronomy references which tell you to look for either a specific year, a specific month, specific day, and so on and so forth. All right. So these are considered the effect due to the near Earth phenomenon, which is what? A tithi, a nakshatra, a lunar month, a particular season, and you can see those type of references. Now, as a comparison, why we need to classify? Because think of it. If you have seen this cartoon before, a drunkard man is looking for his lost coin, and cops ask him, did you drop it here? And the drunkard man says, no, I dropped it like 2 blocks away down the street. And then the cops ask, why are you looking for it here? And the drunkard man says, because the light is better here. Okay, so we have to first know where did we drop the coin. Okay, are we looking into the right, approximately right area? And that is what that evidence in the blue does. I don't know how many of you have used this equipment called vernier caliper. Most of you would be familiar with it. So if suppose you want to measure a dimension of something, okay, so like dimension of this pen, you are going to take those two prongs and nicely put it around this. Okay, if you want to measure the, say, the diameter, and you take two types of readings. One reading is on this main scale, okay, and then there is a secondary reading on the secondary or vernier or the finer scale, where you try to match the line here, which line matches, you do some mathematical calculations, and it gives you supposedly a precise and accurate measurement for whatever thing you are measuring. But remember this, when I'm using my vernier caliper, and if I make a mistake or an error in applying it here to get the approximate reading wrong, it does not matter how fine, how refined I'm taking this reading on this secondary scale, because then I will get an answer which appears to be precise. Well, it is precise, but it is wrong because I did not apply my vernier caliper the right way. So therefore, the readings in the blue are very crucial, very important. And I'm going to now quickly walk you through how that led us to that 5561 BCE. Again, our axis of time. So we begin with our time, 21st century. And this one particular observation that I told you, I ran into when I was doing my master's in Canada. That observation goes something like this. Ya chaisha visruta rajas trailokye sadhu sammata arundhati tayapesha vasishta prushtata kruta. This is Vyasadeva telling Dhritarashtra just day before the war. He's telling many things to Dhritarashtra, many astronomy observations he discussed of that time, okay, of that year, particular time of the Mahabharata war. Vyasa says he's observing the sky for a long time, okay, during the daytime, during the nighttime, during the sunrise, during the sunset, and he's making these observations. One of the observation, this is very crucial observation, he says Arundhati, which is a star Arundhati in the Saptarshi, and Vasishta is another star. He's saying, look, Arundhati is walking ahead of Vasishta. Now, why is this such a big deal? Because if you go tonight outside and look at the Arundhati Vasishta at night, you'll find it is the Vasishta who is walking ahead of Arundhati. Now, if you use astronomy knowledge, astronomy simulations, astronomy data, and go back in time, 1,000 years, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years, you'll still find Vasishta is walking ahead, but Vyasa is saying the other way, Arundhati is walking ahead. This is the problem I started working with in 1995. Finally, I figured it out in 2009. And what it told me is that actually astronomically, there is a time when Arundhati can be seen as walking ahead of Vasishta if we watch from the earth in the northern direction, in the northern hemisphere. And that time period is only this, 11,091 BC to 45 BCE. So now remember, we have to bring that Vijnana Buddhi, Tarka Shastra, Tantra Yukti all together. So Vyasa is saying Arundhati is walking ahead of Vasishta at the time of Mahabharata. Our astronomy investigation is saying that Arundhati can be seen walking ahead of Vasishta only during this time, between 11,091 and 45 BCE. So our inference is that based on this one reference, Mahabharata appears to have happened between these two dates. Okay. Very recently, another researcher, Siddhartha Chabra, he wanted to test what I am claiming. Is it true or not? That is what we call scientific validation. And what he found is, he said that is true, but my dates are not exactly correct, because he used more precise astronomy data that is available in very recently. So after 10 years of my initial work, and he said, actually the interval is much shorter. Okay, from 10,000 to 48 BC to 4636 BC. Again, imagine we are going in the search of a Niagara Fall as a metaphor. Okay, so we have flown from India to America, and now we are going towards the American-Canadian border, something like this. Okay, now I'm going to quickly take you to another data, which is related to Bhishma Nirvan. Most of you would know that Bhishma fell in the battle on the 10th day of the war. War lasted for 18 days. And if you read Mahabharata, you will find that chronologically, Bhishma was on the bed of arrows for definitely more than 92 days. Now, some of you will say, what's a big deal? Let him be as long as he wants to or as long as it's required. Well, astronomically, it makes a big deal, because when you take this data into account and try to connect with the month, the tithi, the season of the Mahabharata war that is described in the Mahabharata text, and find out the day of a winter solstice, and when you want to fit minimum of 92 days between those two events, falling of Bhishma and the day of winter solstice, okay, it takes you again to that 5561 BC. Enormous evidence, okay? I'm just going to go fast through this. If in a question answer we have to go, we'll come back to this. Enormous evidence in the Mahabharata text that simply says that Bhishma was on the bed of arrows definitely for more than 92 days. So remember what we are doing now. We are bringing these different pieces together to solve this jigsaw puzzle. So if we just look at the Bhishma Nirvana evidence that I just mentioned astronomically, it gives you a very tighter interval now, from 7000 BC to 4700 BC. Let's go to the next one. Take that same Bhishma Nirvana evidence and combine with another evidence from the Mahabharata text. During the 18 days of the war, we have beautiful descriptions of the phases and positions of the moon through the 18 days of the war. And these are specific references from the Mahabharata. I'm showing you on this other side, okay? So for example, when you read 6.51, that means Parva 6, which is a Bhishma Parva, 51 is a chapter 51, and verses 40, 43, okay? I'm just looking at this second area here. And these are the 18 days of the war. Okay, and who was the general? First 10 days was Bhishma, then 5 days was Drona, then 2 days Karna, then Shalya, and for one night it was Ashwatthama. Okay, all right. So again, if I bring that evidence together, I get another interval, and I can go on, and essentially I end up with a 1600 years interval within which one should search for the year of Mahabharata war. Okay, I'll go fast through this. Quickly, I'm going to show you a puzzle. And because just to manage the time, I'm not going to give you sufficient time to solve it. What you're seeing, but I want you to understand why I'm showing you this puzzle. There are 20 small sticks like that, and they have formed these 7 squares of the same size. If I give you the task, you are allowed to take any 3 segments out, okay, and reapply them in a meaningful fashion to turn these 7 squares into 5 squares. Now, those of you who love puzzles, you will just get busy at this and you will do it. Some other people will say, this is impossible. How can you do that? And so on. You can see the variation. I'm going to go fast through this. I'm going to give you the answer. So for example, as some people may say it's impossible, other people will say, that's a piece of cake. Here it is. And they may just show this answer. Some of you might have already solved this. Okay, so if you remove these 3, now just let's apply it here. So those 3 are gone, and I'm going to reapply in the top right hand corner. And now I have 5 squares of exactly same size. So something that prima facie may look hard to do, impossible to do, it is possible to do, okay, in some cases, if not all cases. Why do I bring this puzzle? Because Mahabharata evidence is like a puzzle. Just at the beginning, Anushaji described, and it says sometimes we just question why Krishna did that and why Bhishma did that. Think of it, if you are familiar with the business school, but I'm sure the case studies are used everywhere. But in a business school these days, you will find often, I'm sure in the law school also, people use case studies. And the case study may have an answer in the sense of what actually happened. But that is not the idea behind doing the case study. The case study is to make you think and see what decisions you would have reached. Think of it like that in case of Mahabharata. Number of you would know the story. You can take it literally, you can take it allegorically, that Vyasa needed a good typist in a modern language. And so he invited Ganeshji. Ganeshji came, but Ganeshji put a condition. Ganeshji said, I will do it only on one condition. And anyone remembers what that condition is? Since you are on the mute and stay on the mute, I will tell you on your behalf. The Ganeshji said, I will do it if you ensure that I don't have to wait. I don't have to stop. You should continuously feed me what to type, so to say. And Vyasaji said, yes, I will do that, but I have a counter condition for you. You cannot start typing until you truly understand what I am saying. Okay, so with that, they both agreed and they completed the whole writing of the Mahabharata. Mahabharata itself tells us that it took 3 years for them to write this grantha. But when the grantha was ready, how was this grantha? And Vaishampayan ji describes this to Janmejaya. He says this grantha is, how is it? Grantham granthi tada chakre munir gudam kutuhala. This grantha is full of curiosities and full of mysteries, okay, full of puzzles, okay. The kutuhala, but the other granthi means like twists, okay. There are twists in it, and I would just want to give you a flavor of those twists, and we will stop. So we use some evidence to come up with the middle area of 1600 years, sometime from like 5000 BC to like 7000 BC. Now, how do we arrive at 5561 BC? I mean, that is a big subject. I mean, I have taught 5-day-long Mahabharata workshop, okay, and still people are kind of wondering, oh, this is exciting, but still I haven't understood the last word on it. But I just want to give you a flavor of it. And for that, I'm going to use the planetary evidence. We know all our 5 visible planets plus Rahu, Ketu, and so on and so forth. Moon and Sun, they are also considered planets in the Indian astronomy. Look at how beautiful, how precise and accurate the descriptions are. The numbers that you are seeing, so imagine Earth at the center, we are watching from the Earth, and this is our reference frame of 27 or 28 nakshatra. These are the stars along the sun's path, the ecliptic in the sky, and they allow us to track the positions of planets, sun, moon, and so on. All right. So let me tell you, just to give you a highlight, how rich is the Mahabharata evidence or Mahabharata astronomy evidence. I don't know if you can recognize that planet, that is Saturn. So what is the reference? For example, Mahabharata says, Bhagam nakshatra akramya surya putrena pidate. The Surya Putra is a Saturn. It is doing akraman, okay, on a Bhaga nakshatra, which is Purva Falguni, Uttara Falguni, that 8 and 9 there. Or this is now Mars, okay. So it, for example, says, Magha Swangarako Vakra Shravanecha Brahaspati. That Magha did something Vakra near, the Mars did Vakra near nakshatra Magha. Okay, that Vakra I am describing as an oblique crossing of the ecliptic, and you can show that to be true for 5561 BCE. Now that planet Jupiter is described near Shravan Nakshatra, Magha Swangarako Vakra Shravanecha Brahaspati. Near Nakshatra Shravan, Brahaspati did the same thing. Okay, now Mars is shown again. It says Krutva Changarako Vakra Jeshtaya Madhusudana Anuradha Prarthayate Maitram Samshemanniva. Anuradha Prarthayate and Jeshta, 13 and 14 are Jeshta and Anuradha. It is doing that same Vakra thing, that O thing, near those 2 nakshatra. Again, Mars is explained. Nunam Madhbhayam Krishna Kuruna Samupastitam Visheshenahi Varshneya Chitra Pediyate Graha. That same planet, in a very unique fashion, is giving trouble to nakshatra Chitra, that is number 10. Okay. Now, these 2 planets are described again. Samvatsara Sthainancho Graha Prajulito Ubho Vishakhayo Samipasto Brahaspati Shanescharo. Saturn and Jupiter were settled for a year near Nakshatra Vishakha, number 12. Okay, and they were shining brightly. Naturally, that is a retrograde motion. If you understand astronomy, you know that that's referring to retrograde motion. Then you have many descriptions of other planets, for example, Moon and Sun together afflicting Rohini Nakshatra, Saturn afflicting Rohini Nakshatra, Prajapatyam cha Nakshatra Graha Tikshna Mahadyuti Shaneschara Pidayati Pidayan Pranikodikam. Okay, just on and on. On the 17th day of the war, when Karna is killed, again Vyasadeva describes Jupiter afflicting Nakshatra Rohini. Okay, then we have references to Venus. We have again references to Mars. Very beautiful. This is a retrograde reference to Mars. It says Dhruvam Prajwalitam Ghoram. Okay, Apasavya Pravartate. The Mars became steady and very scary. Okay, and became steady in one place. Where? Apasavya Pravartate started going in the other direction. Chitra Swatyantare Chaiva Dishtita Parushagra. Chitra and Swati are number 10 and 11. On and on. I'm going to go fill one more. I will say this number 23 and 22. What you see is a Venus. Very beautiful description. It says Shukram Proshtapade Purve Samaruya Vishampate Uttaretu Parikramya Sahita Pratyadikshite. Just like we go to the mandir and do the parikrama, a circle. Uttaretu Parikramya, it turns to the north, and they did a parikrama. Uttaretu Parikramya Sahito Pratyudikshite, where Shukram Proshtapade Purve, near Nakshatra Purva Bhadrapada, Proshtapade, which is 22, 23, Purva and Uttara Bhadrapada, and goes on and on. And there are many conjunctions, many other things. My point is close to 35 or more than 35 astronomy references, astronomy combinations like this. Now you can start realizing to solve this jigsaw puzzle, it cannot be solved for any date. In fact, I have shown that the only date that matches is that 5561 BC. Quickly, I'm almost done. So I started with astronomy. All I shared with you is possibly 1% of the astronomy work that I have done. And that is only what can be done in a short presentation like this. But my point is, I started with astronomy, but I did not stop there. All the different names that you are seeing there, climatology, geology, archaeology, hydrology, oceanography, seismology, okay, just genealogy of the kings, okay, which is genealogy list, chronology, ancient Indian narratives, other texts like Ramayana, does it fit with this timing? What about the Rigveda? What about physical anthropology? What about genetics? What about the travel records of Greek travelers in our recent times, like only 2000 years ago, talking about the Indian history as it was told to them by the Indians, by common Indians, okay? So sometimes the information may not be exactly perfect, but directionally, is it correct? And the answer is yes. Okay, so all of this evidence from different fields also takes you, either corroborates or actually helps you again revalidate that specific year 5561 BCE. And again, I'll encourage you to watch my videos where I have shown how the flooding and destruction of Dwarka can be explained for 5525 BCE from the oceanography evidence around the world. Or if you look at the genetic evidence for the Mahabharata war, I mean, they did not do it for Mahabharata war. It perfectly matches for 5561 BC of the Mahabharata war. So quick summary, if you come across any Mahabharata claim, you can ask these questions. Is this true for your claim? Is this true for your claim? And that's how we can go through multiple different claims and decide which one is right. Okay, so if you come across. Now, this is what I have seen. This is a political picture, but I'm not using it for political purposes. I'm just using this as a metaphor. What has happened? There are, as I said, there are more than 130 different claims for the year of Mahabharata war by those many different researchers. Okay. Now, some of the evidence that I showed you, especially in the blue, but everything in the orange also, what you will find, majority, 99.99% of these researchers have simply not bothered to look at any of this evidence. Some of them have looked at maybe 1%, 2%, maximum of say 10% of the evidence that is there in the Mahabharata. But based on that, they have arrived at various dates, and I'm just showing you the samples. As I said, there are 130. But what I did just for fun, I counted number of individuals standing on the podiums, and those many dates I put in the below, right? So from 3762 to all the 1198 BC. So why I'm showing you this date? Actually, as you become aware of my work, as you become aware of other works, you will start seeing that, because I will, some of you who is listening is going to send me an email or WhatsApp or whatnot saying, oh, but somebody so and so says it is 3762 or 3162 or 3143. Please don't do that. I would encourage you to read my works. I would encourage you to read their works. But my assertion is that even when their claims are very different from each other, when it comes to 5561 BCE, they almost see a reason to unite and fight against 5561 BCE. And that's how you will see them lined up hands in hands. Okay. All right. Quickly, my books, if you are outside India, from Amazon, these 3 books. The When Did the Mahabharata War was written in 2011, Historic Rama was written in 2014, and the Bhishma Nirvana was written in 2018. If you are inside India through Subbu Publications, you can order this online. So with that, I'm going to stop. Hopefully I kept up the time. My apologies for losing the internet or whatever happened there. And if we have some time, we can get into a few questions, and I would be happy to respond to objections or answers.
Okay. So here is one question. It is from India. So Lavnish is asking, many religious organizations say that Krishna, Sri Krishna is the supreme God, and from him, 3 forms of Vishnu have originated. But from beginning, we have studied and have been told from our elders that Vishnuji is the supreme God. And Krishna himself is the 8th avatar of Lord Vishnu. So which version is accurate?
Okay. Whatever. So again, remember, we talked, great question, by the way, and not directly related to what I presented, but that's perfectly fine. Remember, we talked about the 3 axes, the axis of a Samshaya, axis of a Shraddha, and axis of a Jidnyasa. Okay. First, we have to decide which axis we are talking here. So if we are talking on a Shraddha, whatever works for you, ultimately the objective is that it should, whatever that Shraddha, it should take you to your desired purpose, the Karya, and do it. Also, what happens is, like say, to every mother, okay, if we take some objective criteria to define which one, what is considered a beautiful child, you can put them and some criteria, measure the width and the dimensions of the brain and eyes and whatnot. But to a mother, her child is the best, more affectionate, right? It is actually the same thing with when it comes to your Ishta Devata. And many times, almost all times, people think their Ishta Devata is the best. Nothing wrong with it, as long as they understand it is their subjective conviction and they should not push it objectively on others. Yeah, we can go to the next one.
Okay. Anusha ji, please ask next question.
Yes, Nilesh ji. This question comes from one of our Colorado veterans. It says, we have learned that we have 7 Chiranjeevis or 7 immortals in our history, and one of them comes from the great Mahabharata. It's none other than the great Ashwadhama. It is said that he's still alive and roaming in the jungles with a wound on his forehead. Is it really possible for someone to be alive for this long, or it's just a myth or maybe an analogy of something else?
Okay, again, a great question. Anything is possible, but we need evidence. Again, it's up to you whether you want evidence or not. Nyaya Darshana gives a wonderful definition. It says pramanas tashartha pratipatte. Okay, a claim can be established only by evidence. Okay, so, and if there is no evidence, if you have heard the name Christopher Hitchens, there is a Hitchens razor which says exactly the same thing what Nyaya Darshana said, just I quoted. It says any claim made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Okay, so if there is no evidence, we can dismiss it. But let's address the issue of a Chiranjeeva, because that is there. We see that, what is that? Ashwathama, Balirvyaso, Hanumansha, Vibhishana, Krupah, Parshuramashya, Saptaite, Chiranjeevinam. And sometimes the list can be slightly different. But Ashwathama is there, is part of this list. It can be understood in many ways. One is Chiranjeevi means 2 ways. One is they had a long life that is given. Okay, Chiranjeevi Bhava, when the elders give us that Ashirvad, they are not saying you be there forever. We all will be gone, but you stay here. That is not what the elders are saying. They say have a long life, have a successful life, enjoy your life here, right? That is one. The other meaning of Chiranjeev that I have heard, and I'm simply sharing that, again, this is not anything we can test objectively, is that in this case of these 7 individuals, exactly how their life ended is not known. Okay, in Maharashtra, I know the concept. Now tell me if it is also true in the other parts of India, wherever you come from. If, I'm just taking a certain specific example, a lady, and say her husband, he goes on a travel, and that used to happen in the old days, but even now. And for some reason, his whereabouts are not known. Okay, so, and we could never trace it. Then that lady, in Marathi, they will call Akhanda Saubhagyavati. I mean, she is to be considered, the married for rest of her life, because there is no knowledge of her husband who disappeared, so to say. Okay, in that same, just bring that analogy and say Chiranjeevi is in that sense. We don't know how their life ended, therefore they are called Chiranjeevi. But it's not to be taken literally. But if someone has that doubt, then that person has to turn that jidnyasa into saprayojan, do the experiments. It took me 15 years for one verse. Maybe they are lucky. They might able to find Ashwatthama in 10 years. Then they can take the photograph and then show it to us.
That was very interesting. And yes, thank you so much.
Okay, so next question we are taking. So somebody is asking, as you say, Mahabharata is from around 5561 BCE, and Ramayana even way before, like 12,209 BCE. So science still says that one of the oldest known civilization, such as Mesopotamian civilization and Sumerian civilization, etc., date back to just 3000 BCE.
Mm-hmm.
So why doesn't science account for Mahabharata and Ramayana?
Okay, great question. In the way the question is put forward, that is not a fault of the person who did it, but see, how does this logic works? Premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, premise 4, premise 5, and you can put them together and draw the inference. Okay, you can draw the inference, but the inference can be wrong if any one of the previous premises are wrong. So for example, when it says, you said, and whoever said that, the science says that the oldest civilization is Mesopotamian civilization, and that goes back to 3000 BCE. Okay, first thing, science doesn't say that, number one. Okay, now let me correct the individual or whatever the research that he or she is aware. Even the Mesopotamian civilization, forget 3000 BC, it goes back to 6000 BC. Okay, so they have not updated themselves. Okay, so there is a Sumerian civilization, a Mesopotamian civilization, Babylonian civilization. They're all happening one place. In fact, it's a one civilization. The different people might have joined. That same wrong framework we use even in India. Like, something is found in Harappa, we call Harappa civilization. Then Mohenjo-daro civilization, Rakhigadi civilization. My God, it's like you dig in Hyderabad 3 places. That's not like a Sikandarabad civilization and Kachiguda civilization and Hyderabad civilization. Okay, it's an Indian civilization. It's the same thing. But the next point, there is sufficient evidence, and there is no dearth of evidence, only dearth of time for people to read it and do it. All the Mesopotamian Babylonian civilization, actually now you can show with the genetic evidence and of course cultural evidence that these are out of India migrations. That is not to say, so that is not to say that the people were not there before. Okay, in fact, just because you brought up, and where is Mesopotamia? Iraq. That is Iraq. Let me and I will encourage all of you to watch my serial somewhere, the YouTubes on Sangam Talks and wherever, Sugriva's Atlas or on Sattology. The place called Baghdad. Okay, do you know how the Iraqis say it? They say it Baghdad. Baghdad. Okay, now you go to Mahabharata and start reading Rajasuya Yajna descriptions, or go to Ramayana and Sugriva's Atlas. That place is described as a Pragjyotish. Again, we will be confused. Oh, come on, but I heard Pragjyotish is in Assam. Yeah, there may be another Pragjyotish in Assam. How many Rampurs are there and how many Hyderabad's are there? Many, okay? But this Pragjyotish is where Bhagadatta came from in the Mahabharata war. And if you see the Arjuna journey to the west direction and north direction, he goes to Pragjyotish, he meets Bhagadatta. My point is, we are talking of a Mahabharata happening before all this Babylonian or Mesopotamian civilization. So that solves the problem. Was there any other question to that, or that answers the question? Okay, you're on the mute. That's fine. Yeah, okay. We can go to the next one.
So I guess, you covered all the topics. Thank you.
So Nilesh, next one is about how things went with Pandavas. The question is it true that Pandavas went to Swarglok through Kedarnath after the end of the war? If it is yes, then why through that route? Or like, is it just another analogy what is said in Mahabharata?
Okay, again a great question. Swargalok we will keep aside for a minute. Okay, I might have been to Swarga, but I don't have a memory of it, so I can't really just do the corroboration of it. But if you look at the descriptions where they went, just from the description, it appears that they crossed Himalayas, they crossed Kailas, the Mansarovar area, and possibly went into the desert of Gobi. I mean, just from the descriptions or somewhere in that area. Now, this was a somewhat known method, okay, not just in India. I'm going to give you an example from some other place. But India, what used to happen, if you think of ashrama, the brahmacharya ashram, the grihastha ashram, vanaprastha ashram, you know, many times vanaprastha ashram, we think immediately translation is retirement. Just focus on that word, vanaprastha. Vana is a forest and prasthan is to going to the forest. Okay, they are going to the forest. And what is the idea? First thing, so that the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law are not fighting. Okay, that is the one achievement that is to be achieved. But then the other thing is, this is a time for contemplation. And eventually you want to become so free from these attachments, so that actually when your Atma leaves the body, it's not a big deal. It's not some chaotic situation. It's not emotionally hurting experience. And part of that, many times as a sannyas ashram or otherwise, when people want to completely give up their body, they just simply took to a yatra of a kind. Okay, they chose different ones. Some people will go to the bank of Ganga and live their life in some kind of a sadhana. Have you seen the movie? I don't recall the name, but a Japanese movie, I think Narayaniya or some such name, if you've seen. It's a black and white movie. Definitely watch it. Beautiful movie, where they had a tradition where the old folks, very old folks, would simply go from the civilization where they're living all the way to the top of the mountain, and they survive with their own efforts, and eventually they pass their body. So that's what it is. Now, as to going to the Swarga, it can be taken literally, it can be taken metaphorically, but it will go back to the Hitchens razor. Okay, I mean, exactly, unless we have evidence. If we don't have evidence, doesn't mean it's wrong, but we have to rely on the narration, whatever has been told to us. Richard Feynman, I just quoted his name somewhere, you know, like let's do some physics. Richard Feynman says something beautifully. He says, we know, or we come to know a lot more than what science can verify. So in this case, it's a narration that they went to Surga, okay? But we have no way of verifying that.
Yeah, that again made a great sense. Thank you so much.
Okay. So the next question is, there are various evidence and artifacts that proves the existence of Mahabharata. Did your study include the study of those evidences and artifacts? Can you please name a few artifacts?
Okay, so the question is, did we find any tools or any artifacts from the Mahabharata times? Okay. One answer is that, archaeologically speaking, when it is explored in India, many archaeologists are doing it. So take Rakhi-Gadi, for example. It is kind of in the news. And the layers in the Rakhi-Gadi actually go back to 5500 BCE, the time of Mahabharata, and beyond. And so they did find some pots and pans and some houses and some storage bins. So the evidence is there. But how can I take that evidence and say, oh, it is from a Mahabharata? Because I have to have a corresponding description in Mahabharata to match it. Okay, I don't have it. So now coming to the tools or the weapons and so on. Well, we have in India, or even otherwise around the world, we have not found any tools, say swords and whatnot, that can be dated to Mahabharata times. Okay, no, we have not found it. But remember, as a researchers, we are like beggars. Then beggars cannot be choosy. We can only talk about the evidence that we have found. We can talk about the evidence that we have. We cannot talk of the evidence that we don't have. Okay, but the mistake we should not make, and I'm not saying that the person who asked the question is making the mistake, but the mistake we should not make is the mistake that people typically make, which is to equate the absence of evidence with evidence of absence. Okay, we should not do that. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. We may find things in future. We may never find things in future because maybe they are dissolved, they are stolen, they are reused, remelted. Anything is possible. But we should not be surprised if we find something that perfectly matches for 5561 BC or 12,209 BC or beyond. Thank you.
So Nilesh, this is a some follow-up question. So it is said when the Vishnu avatar comes, the yuga ends. So when is the 10th avatar or Kalki expected? Is there any study based on that? And it also adds that why did and when did Saraswati go extinct?
Okay. And why and when did Saraswati go extinct? Okay. So two questions. Let me handle the first one. That is easy to answer. Okay. It's the crazy question. Now, that comes when the Kalki is going to come. I also get the question, please give me the birth date and birth year of Matsya Avatar. That is the most commonly asked question. Okay. See, what we have to understand, of course, there are some historical things in between, Rama, Krishna, Parshurama, and so on, okay? And possibly going back to Nrusimha and so on. But also understand, just like I said, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh are also metaphor. We can understand them metaphorically. Similarly, the Dashavatar from Matsya, Kurma, Varaha, Nrusimha, Vaman, Parshuram, Ram, Krishna, and all the way to Kalki can be understood in a metaphorical fashion. Okay, elsewhere I have given talks. I call this Yuga Enchilada. Okay, I have given 5 talks so far. I will encourage you to watch them. So think of the biological evolution on the earth. See, for the West, until Darwin, the history simply meant Bible for most part. And there were a couple other books like Herodotus, History of the World and stuff like that. Okay, now for us, the historical text existed like Ramayana, Mahabharata, the Puranas, and many others. But we also had this Purana, we have the concept of cosmology, the entire evolution, the geological evolution, the biological evolution. So now think of Darwin, take a Darwin's evolution and try to compare with a biological evolution described in the Dashavatar. So first a unicellular organism in the water, turn into multicellular, then amphibians. Okay, think of it, Matsya, Kurma, Varaha, Nrusimha. So it is a framework, it is a construct to understand biological evolution. It is like asking, tell me the birth date of first amoeba. That question is as foolish as this question. Okay, same thing for a Kalki. It can be an individual that people might have predicted. Well, when actually it comes out, we will know. I don't know the answer, by the way. So there is a word, Phala Hetu. How many of you have heard that? Phala Hetu. Think of even the sequence of it. Phala, meaning the outcome, and then Hetu. Many times we first know the outcome, like we stumble on a staircase, and now we say, who did this mischief? So first the outcome happens, and now we go back looking for it. So when the Kalki comes, we will know. Until then, we have to focus on the Vijnana Buddhi, Tarka Shastra, and Tantra Yukti. Thank you.
And it also adds asking about
Saraswati. So thank you. Thank you for reminding me. Okay, so the question was why Saraswati disappeared and when. Quick timeline of Saraswati. Saraswati is flowing in India for a very long time. How long, we don't know, but I can tell you how far back we can go. The recent evidence that came from Bikaner, if you are following the research, that takes us to the time of, now listen carefully, 172,000 years. 172,000 years in the Bikaner. And if you look at the work of Singh, 2018 paper from IIT Kanpur, you will find the beautiful evidence of Saraswati flowing in its all majesty, that grand Saraswati for last 100,000 years. Then we have evidence of Yamuna separating from Saraswati around 50,000 BC. We have evidence of Satluj separating from Saraswati in 13,000 BC. We have Saraswati almost going down and Vinashana appearing, the place where it ended on the land. Then we have evidence for the intensification of monsoon around 7,000 BC through 4,500 BC, which is the time of Mahabharata, by the way. And again, it's very fast drying up and then completely disappearing sometime by 3,000 BC, 2,000 BC. And what are the reasons? Well, I gave the reasons. Yamuna separated from Saraswati, Satluj separated from Saraswati, and the monsoon went down.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so the next question is, various weapons described in Mahabharata exist today, like laser-guided missiles and Brahmastra, like nuclear weapon in modern world. Those weapons are much more controlled and better refined and scaled. What happened over the time that these technologies are lost over time? Also, where did the Brahmastra land? It is heard that Sri Krishna diverted that to Mars. Is that true?
Okay.
So there's two questions.
Right. And you have to keep me honest there if I missed the question there, right? So they were better controlled. Is that what the person said in the past, right? Yeah, they were better controlled, but keep that in mind. It also depended on the person who was using it. In fact, the good example of Arjun and Ashwatthama both using the Brahmastra. Okay, Arjun could not only release it, but could take it back. Ashwatthama could not take it back. So everyone had a different level of expertise. Okay, so that is important. Then what happened to those? Well, we don't know. But remember, there are two types of these weapons. One is a shastra and another is a astra. Okay, and there you might have heard different definitions. So like a shastra is like, immediately like a sword and a club and stuff like that. And astra was like a missiles, just to use that. So missiles need a computer program, where to go. The computer program, that language, which means a language code. Okay, the astra had a mantra code. Mantra is a language. Now we have all that we are left with are descriptions. We don't have the technology manual that is left around for us to use. So we have lost it. What was the other question? The Brahmastra, did Arjun or Krishna deflected to the Mars?
Yeah.
The great thing of me giving lectures is that I always get to hear something I have never heard before. So this is interesting. Now some of you might have heard it. No, I have not heard. Again, I will say, this pramanat arthascha pratipatte. Okay, a claim can only be established by evidence. I have not seen the evidence. I don't know if the person who asked the question has seen the evidence, but wherever he or she heard that question, whoever said that, claimed that, that is the right person to ask this question, not me. Thank you.
Right. And just to lighten up on this, Nileshji, so maybe, he actually did, and that is why Mars is all dry today.
Okay. Well, again, Rajnishji, so that is a possibility. But again, I will pull my astra of a Hitchens razor. Okay, which says a claim made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. I'm not saying that is not a possibility, but until I see the evidence, I have no reason to believe it one way or the other. But let me bring back that previous framework again on a humorous note, which is to say the jignasa, the shanka, the samshay, and the shraddha. So this can be taken on a belief of a shraddha, fine, whatever. So therefore, because of that shraddha, the person says, oh, I am going to become an astronaut and I want to go to the Mars. Fine. It has done its job, in a shraddha fashion. But if you have to do in a samshay or a jignasa, then it is that person who has to invest to find it out. See, just on that lighter note, I get these suggestions all the time. Nileshji, now work on this thing. Nileshji, work on X, work on Y, work on Z. I said, I'm jokingly, I say, if I do all this, then what will you do? You will be bored to death, So again, that's why, the saprayojana sandigdha, but it has to be a part of your own sadhana. That is very important.
So Nileshji, the next question is like more in lines with the previous question. It says the historical evolution of technology in the modern world says the first step is to harness energy from natural resources. So
harness energy from?
Natural resources.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it all began with evolution of electricity generation through wind, water, nuclear, and now solar. So if we had all mentioned technologies like nuclear weapons in Mahabharata era, why did our ancestors never think of generating energy, and why did they still use the earthen lamps?
Okay.
Earthen lamps, yes.
Right. So I'll go back again to premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, premise 4, and the inference. One of the premise that was stated was that, hey, we have this whole discussion of a nuclear energy in the Mahabharata. How come they are using the lamps? The problem with this statement is the fact that we have a description of nuclear energy in the Mahabharata is incorrect. Okay. We may have descriptions of energies that we even don't understand. That is a possibility. But somebody saying we understand there was a nuclear description is absolutely incorrect. I mean, I would challenge that person to show me where the nuclear thing is mentioned. So therefore, the second question is redundant, like, and in terms of why we have a lamps. But on that point, let me take a quick digression and also mention, even when technology exists, okay, I'm not claiming nuclear technology exists in Ramayana, Mahabharata. I did not say that. So no one should quote me. People will take small clip from here, just cut, paste, right time, and says Nilesh said there is a nuclear technology. No, I did not say that. But even when technology exists, many times we will make use of whatever is available. The other question that people have asked me, just like this lamp, is in the Ramayana times, Ravana had a Pushpak Viman and all that good, fascinating stuff. But when they catch Hanuman, they tie his hands with the vines, of the trees and barks and stuff like that. So why not sophisticated metal clips and, stuff like this? And the example I give them, it says, well, think of it here. If you have seen the electrical poles, in America, what are they made up of? Anyone knows? I mean, Anushaji, have you observed?
Maybe stone.
Wood. It's wood.
Tree, essentially tree. Just the cut trees are there, right? Now, if you go to India, which is much backward, people would like to claim compared to here. Do you know what the electrical bars are made out of? They are either made out of concrete or metal. Now, therefore, should we say that India is more sophisticated than America? No, that is a very not logically correct way to do it. Whatever is available is used. There is no dearth of trees in America in comparison to India, and therefore we are using different materials. That was not a question asked, but I'm just using it. Yeah.
Maybe like we assume the energy is nuclear based on what we see in like movies or something, but it's not that exactly.
Correct. And again, it may be nuclear, it may not be nuclear. We don't know. We don't have evidence.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so the next question is, when you say astronomical evidences, is it based on fMRS's data or some other tools? And if Bhishma was on the bed of arrows for more than 92 days, then why most versions of Mahabharata says that he was lying down there for 10 days?
Okay. Okay, so I wouldn't ask the person's name. No, I don't know which version of Mahabharata this person is referring to. There is not even a single version of Mahabharata which will say 10 days. Okay, so that number is just wrong. In fact, see, that is how many of these vague claims come into being. So now, now somebody watches our episode and they just go there and saying, actually, I found very interesting information today that Bhishma was on the bed of arrows for 10 days. And another nonsense just continues. Another nonsense ensues. Okay. There is no mention of a 10 days at all. Because this 92-day plus period is mentioned, I went fast through it, is mentioned in a different way. Just quickly to show you how it is mentioned. So one thing is even not mentioned, which is to say Bhishma fell on the 10th day of the war is mentioned. Somewhere else, it is also mentioned that the war lasted for 18 days. So we have to put it together to understand and say that Bhishma was on the bed of arrows during the war for 9 days, because war was 18 days and he fell in the battle on the 10th day of the war. Then the war was ended. They did the cremations for all the fallen warriors. Then the Mahabharata tells us, Shanti Parva, that they left for the bank of Ganga and they stayed there for 1 month. So I think Sana Singh ji, you asked the question. So you do the math for me. So 9 days plus 1 month. Okay, you can take 27 or 30. Okay, so simplicity 39 days. Then they came back to Hastinapur. Then Yudhishthir was crowned as a king. Yudhishthir gave the offices. Yudhishthir gave the palaces to different people. Krishna reminded him that we should go and see Bhishmacharya. They went and saw Bhishmacharya on Kurukshetra. And on this day, Krishna said to Bhishma, you have additional 56 days to live. Panchashatam Shatra Kuru Pravira Shesham Dinanam Tava Jivitasya. So 9 plus 30 plus X, that's some days that we don't know, plus 56, that gives you like 95 plus 95 days plus. Okay, so that is how the description comes. And those 56 days are again described. Every day is described. That Yudhishthir comes back to Hastinapur, goes to meet Bhishmacharya. On the 6th day, Bhishmacharya recites Vishnu Sahasranam. Krishna recites Shiva Sahasranam. Then Vyasa tells Yudhishthir tells Bhishma, send Yudhishthir back to Hastinapur. Bhishma says, go to Hastinapur, don't come back until the day of winter solstice. Mahabharata tells us that Yudhishthir went to Hastinapur, lived there for 15 nights. And when the sun turned north, he came back. I mean, you all put this together, you cannot run away from that 92 or 95 plus. Okay. So let's not, I mean, we have enough of variations to begin with. Let's not lazily put some other variation without reading the Mahabharata, such as like he was there for 10 days. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a lot more of interesting questions coming in, Nileshji, which is a huge success for today. But due to time constraint, we just have to make a hard stop here. And
Sure.
this is the last question from our side. So why is Mahabharata not taught as a history in Indian schools? And what advice would you give to youth who would like to continue research in this area? Do you think they should have some academic background or in personal capacity with fair knowledge of previous research done? Can someone carry out the research further?
Okay. Remind me the first one again. See, my hair are getting gray. So what was the first?
I'm sorry, I did put a lot of things there. So why is Mahabharata not taught as a history in Indian school?
Okay, why the Mahabharata is not taught in India quickly? Because after so-called independence, the British never wanted to teach Mahabharata. Many times they did not understand, fortunately, the importance of Mahabharata. For example, to our freedom fighters, they would not allow other books, but say likes of Lokmanya Tilak or Savarkar or Vinoba or Gandhi, they will say, yeah, please, I want to read the Bhagavad Gita. Like Lokmanya Tilak wrote Gita Rahasya in the Mandalay prison, right? And British used to say, oh, that's fine. Yeah, please give them Bhagavad Gita, because they thought it harmless. Bhagavad Gita is an atom bomb. If there is a nuclear energy, it is Bhagavad Gita. Okay, and that really gave the inspire to this. So, but back to your question, once the freedom was won, well, freedom was won on a paper. It was very much a leftist dominated. I mean, Nehru's mindset is well known. And not to go into the politics, by the way, I mean, Nehru had his own good sides, but when it came to understanding Hindu civilizational, he did not understand it. He was not proud of it. Then Indira Gandhi times, the communists took over. Okay, the Nurul Hasan, the ministry, and the education ministry, and they took away everything. Now the question is, why is it not there? Suddenly we think the Modi ji is there and it should be back there. I mean, it is very naive to think like this. Each one of us, the simple answer is because we are not demanding it. And when we say we are not demanding it on a Twitter is not, it's a starting point, it's not the end point. Okay, if we demand it in such a way that the politicians will respond because they care for the votes. Okay, and we have to do this as a continuous thing. But most of our folks are deracinated. They are very happy wearing the modern clothes and dancing and whatever it is. Nothing wrong with the dance, by the way, or nothing wrong with the modern clothes. My point being, every one of us has to understand, push it, and eventually it will happen. And what we are doing here, or what you guys are doing here, is very much part of that effort. The second question was, who can do this research, what to do? Well, I would say, first thing, because at least currently where it sits, if you are looking for a truly true research that goes after the truth, I mentioned that into the Niti Shastra, you are not going to be successful in the current academia. The current academia, most of the humanities department where this research takes place, fortunately or unfortunately, is very much contaminated. I mean, contaminated to the core by the very much Western Indology methods, by very much a very reductionist thinking, postmodern, all this post-truth, all that kind of thing. Many of them just simply do not have the intellect and acumen and hard work that is required to do what is necessary, as simple as that. So it comes down to, so I'm a chemical engineer by profession. Okay, so I earned at least enough money to last me for 5 years, and that's how I left my job in 2013. I said, I have money for 5 years, I can do this, and if I don't do this, I may not be happy on the deathbed, I wasn't worried about the Swarga. I don't know that, but I have to be happy on the deathbed. So what that means is, anyone who is desiring to do it, the young generation, have to find a profession, at least for now, have to find a profession which will sustain them. Okay. So make a lot of money if you can in a very short time, or make a sustainable money, and simultaneously start studying this. Read voraciously, our grantha, but also scientific books on, all different areas. and look for the toughest problem in anything that excites you, any area of Indic civilization, and try go solving it. You may be successful, you may not be successful, but I can assure you from my experience, you will have a hell of a ride, a great joyous ride, even when you don't find the answer.
Oh, very interestingly, so you feel like we should look at Mahabharata more as a history than something religious or something else?
Well, there is no, this is not an either or scenario.
Okay.
See, Mahabharata has everything, right? So for example, a mother, she's a mother, but she's also a wife to someone, okay? She's a daughter-in-law to someone, and she will be working, and she may be a chief executive officer there, right? And she's a boss to someone, and she may have a boss. It's the same thing. So we don't have to think of Mahabharata as only history, because see, Itihasa, one aspect of Itihasa is a history. Just a quick, we can stop on that one. The definition of Itihasa, it says Dharmartha Kama Mokshanam Upadesham Samanvitam Purva Vruttam Kathayuktam Itihasam Prachakshate. Okay, old historical events, Purva Vruttam, explained, told in a Katha format, in a entertaining, enlightening, educational format. For what? So that it becomes a guidance, okay? Is that for dharma, artha, kama, moksha. So that religious aspects will be the dharma aspects will be there, the kama aspects will be there, the moksha aspects will be there. You'll be amazed how fascinating. You just pick a subject, start reading Mahabharata. Many times when you read in Mahabharata, you says, oh, am I reading really the Mahabharata? Am I reading the religious text? It will surprise you to the core, what you will read in Mahabharata.
Thank you so much, Nileshji, and Sanaji, you can take over.
Thank
Sanaji,
you.
just a sec. Thanks, Nileshji. And we have Shridarji also with us, who is Seva International National Team Board member. Request Shridarji to say a few words. Rajiji, please unmute Shridarji. Shridhar Talanki.
Someone might need to unmute her.
Yeah.
Shridarji, can you please unmute yourself? We have given you the privilege of unmute.
Namaste. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your involvement and your enlightening us with all the knowledge. And I've attended so many of your lectures personally also, and seriously, every time there is so much more. There is new stuff and there is great stuff. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming and talking to us. I would like to thank on behalf of my organization also, and from all of us here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Rajiji, we are looking for Shridhar Talanki ji.
Yes. Shridarji, can you please unmute yourself?
Yes, yeah. Namaste. Namaste, Nileshji. And thank you so much for giving the valuable information about the Mahabharata, and especially the one you mentioned about the Shraddha, Jidnasa and Samshaya. It's very, very useful for all our Colorado community members. So definitely I request all our members to go in that direction, read, research, and with a lot of Shraddha as well as the Jidnasa. Well said, and we'll follow all that one. And really thank you so much for giving this time for our Colorado community members and clearing all the questions related on that one. But again, I know it's a kind of a beginning for all, especially the second generation, our Indians here and Hindus here. So that'll be a good exercise for us. And I really appreciate your time and taking us to the really the Mahabharata time and enlightening us. Dhanyawad. Namaste.
Thank you.
Namaskar. Thank you.
Yes, Sanaji, back to you.
Okay. So thank you, Nileshji, for this wonderful and enlightening session. We are sure this will help us and our younger generation to be more curious about our history and explore more and more channels to get further knowledge about our culture. Many thanks to the audience for making this event a big success by attending in huge numbers, and a big shout out of the young kids who have asked beautiful questions on this platform. I'm sure many of you want to spread the knowledge attained in this session with your friends and family, And we have made the session recording available online for your convenience. A big thanks to Seva organization and Indian Association of the Rockies for organizing this event. And please stay tuned with us for many more such sessions coming in the future based on your feedback. We are already in discussion with the many such knowledge speakers across different topics, and the details of event shall be shared soon on our Facebook page. So please follow our Facebook page, Indian Association of the Rockies, and stay tuned for more updates. And feel free to contact us for further queries. And now we are going to conclude this session with the Shanti Mantra. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahe Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahe.
Thank you, everyone. Okay for me to leave?
Yes.
Thank you.